Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the star maps floating before him. 23 years he had served the Valyrian Empire, and 23 years he had known victory. His dark blue skin showed the scars of countless battles, and his forearms moved with the confidence of a warrior who had never tasted defeat. The Third Fleet spread out behind him like a metal storm, waiting to fall on another world. The hologram showed a small yellow star with 3 planets, marked in red. Human colonies, they called them. New Eden, Haven Station, and Prosperity, such simple names for such a simple species. Zethkar had read the intelligence reports twice and found nothing impressive. These humans had barely left their home system, when other species were already building empires among the stars. His tactical officer approached with data tablets in all 4 hands. The information was clear and disappointing. Human ships used chemical rockets while the Valyrians had mastered quantum drives decades ago. Human weapons fired metal projectiles while Valyrian plasma cannons could melt through any known armor. Human military structure seemed chaotic, with something they called democracy affecting even battlefield decisions. Zethkar dismissed the officer with a wave. This would not be a war, but a cleanup operation. The Empire had conquered 17 different species, and humans would make 18. Perhaps they would surrender quickly like the Corinthians had done. Perhaps they would fight bravely like the Centauri before accepting the inevitable. Either way, the result would be the same. The commander walked to his command chair and activated the fleet communications. 200 ships responded instantly. Battleships that could crack moons. Destroyers that moved faster than thought. Support. Vessels carrying enough troops to occupy a dozen worlds. The humans had 12 ships defending 3 colonies. Mathematics made the outcome certain. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command center orbiting New Eden and watched the long-range sensors with growing concern. The approaching fleet was massive, beyond anything he had expected. As a former Earth Navy officer, he understood numbers, and these numbers spelled doom for every human in the outer colonies. Morrison had volunteered for colonial defense after losing his wife and daughter in the Martian mining accident. Starting over in the outer systems seemed like the right choice then. Now he wondered if he had simply chosen a different way to die. The defense force under his command consisted of converted cargo ships and civilian volunteers. Most had never seen real combat. Lieutenant Amy Carter worked at the tactical station running calculations that made no sense. Her graduation from Luna Military Academy had prepared her for conventional warfare between similar forces. This was like comparing a stone to a starship. The approaching Valyrian fleet outgunned them by ratios that broke her computer models. Morrison watched the alien ships grow larger on his screens. Standard military doctrine said they should surrender immediately. No commander would sacrifice lives in an unwinnable battle. But something in Morrison's chest burned hotter than logic. These were human colonies filled with human families, Earth children who had traveled across the galaxy to build new lives. The communication officer reported incoming transmissions from the other colonies. Haven Station requested evacuation assistance. Prosperity asked for reinforcement that did not exist. New Eden's planetary governor wanted to discuss surrender terms. Morrison ignored them all and focused on the sensor data. The Valyrian ships moved in perfect formation like they were performing a parade instead of approaching a battle. Their formation showed discipline, but also predictability. Carter noticed this too and began running new calculations. If the enemy expected conventional tactics, then unconventional might provide some advantage. Morrison studied the faces of his crew, young men and women who had signed up to protect their new homes. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper worked frantically to squeeze more power from engines that were already running beyond safe limits. Communications Specialist Lisa Barnes coordinated. With the other defense ships using codes, the Valyrians could not break. The alien fleet stopped just outside weapons range and held position. Morrison knew they were waiting for him to make the first move. Surrender or fight. Accept defeat or choose destruction. Standard military wisdom said the choice was obvious. But Morrison remembered something his old commander had told him during the Titan campaign. Sometimes the impossible choice is the only choice worth making. Morrison opened a channel to the approaching fleet and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. His voice was calm, but his message was clear. The humans would not surrender without a fight. They would not abandon their colonies without making the enemy pay for every meter of space. The Valyrian commander probably expected fear or desperate negotiations. Instead, he got something no alien species had ever given the Empire before. A challenge delivered with quiet certainty that the price of victory would be higher than anyone imagined. The message from Captain Morrison crackled across space and reached Zethkar's bridge with crystal clarity. 30 seconds to reverse course or be considered hostile. The Valyrian commander felt his secondary heart skip a beat before amusement replaced surprise. In all his years of warfare, no enemy had ever issued an ultimatum to a superior force. Zethkar activated his personal communicator and shared the human transmission with his sub-commanders. Laughter echoed through the fleet communications as veteran officers heard the impossible threat. A dozen ships challenging 200, primitive technology facing quantum weaponry. The humans apparently did not understand basic mathematics. The flagship moved forward with elegant precision, while the rest of the fleet maintained formation. Zethkar wanted a closer look at these creatures, who spoke so boldly in the face of certain death. His science officer provided detailed scans of the human station. Basic construction, outdated defensive systems, and life signs showing elevated stress, but no panic. Lieutenant Amy Carter watched the alien flagship approach and felt ice forming in her stomach. The enemy ship was beautiful in a deadly way, smooth. Curves that suggested advanced engineering and weapon ports that could probably destroy their entire station with a single salvo. But she also noticed something the aliens might not expect her to see. The Valyrian formation was perfect, but rigid. Every ship held exact position relative to every other ship. Their movement patterns followed mathematical precision that never varied. Carter had studied alien psychology at the Academy and recognized the signs of a species that valued order above adaptation. Captain Morrison stood behind Carter's station and watched her fingers dance across the tactical controls. She was planning something that made his veteran instincts scream warnings. But conventional wisdom had never saved colonies from impossible odds. Sometimes crazy was the only sane response to an insane situation. The Valyrian ultimatum arrived exactly when Carter predicted it would. Surrender immediately or face total destruction. Accept Valyrian rule or watch every human colony burn. Standard conquest protocol delivered with mechanical efficiency. Zethkar probably expected immediate compliance or at least desperate attempts. At negotiation, Morrison keyed his response and spoke with the calm voice of a man who had already accepted death. He thanked the Valyrian commander for the warning and politely declined the generous offer of slavery. Instead, he suggested the aliens might want to reconsider their approach to human space. The galaxy was large enough for everyone if people minded their own business. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper worked frantically in the engine room while Morrison delivered his message. The reactor modifications he had spent months perfecting were about to face their ultimate test. If his calculations were wrong, the station would vaporize before the battle even began. If they were right, the humans might actually surprise their enemies. The human defense ships began moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. Instead of forming defensive lines, they scattered like leaves in a storm. Captain Lisa Barnes took her converted freighter directly toward the alien formation, while Lieutenant Kevin Walsh led his destroyer on a path that looked like suicide. Zethkar watched the human movements with growing confusion. Their ships moved like prey animals fleeing a predator, but their vectors suggested attack rather than retreat. His tactical computers could not predict their intentions because their actions violated every principle of space warfare. The first human ship reached weapons range and immediately opened fire, not with the careful targeting that marked professional military forces, but with concentrated bursts aimed at the alien formation's center. The projectiles moved too slowly to threaten advanced shields, but their trajectory forced the Valyrian ships to adjust position. That adjustment created exactly the opening Carter had calculated. The perfect alien formation developed tiny gaps as ships moved to avoid primitive human weapons. Those gaps became opportunities for the next wave of human ships that arrived from completely different vectors. Commander. Sandra Phillips brought her vessel through a gap that should not have existed and fired point-blank into an alien destroyer. Her chemical explosives could not penetrate advanced armor, but they did not need to. The blast wave pushed the alien ship into its neighbor and created a collision that damaged both vessels. Zethkar realized with growing alarm that the humans were not trying to win a conventional battle. They were turning the Valyrian formation discipline into a weakness by forcing ships to move in predictable ways. Every adjustment the aliens made to avoid human attacks created new vulnerabilities for human exploitation. The human station began, moving with power that its design should not have allowed. Cooper's engine modifications were working beyond theoretical limits as the massive structure accelerated toward the alien fleet. Zethkar understood with horrible clarity that the humans intended to use their own base as a kinetic weapon. Captain Morrison coordinated the impossible battle from his command center while damage reports flooded in from every human ship. They were losing vessels at an alarming rate, but each loss created tactical advantages for the survivors. Human crews seemed to treat destruction as an acceptable price for inflicting damage on the enemy. The alien fleet began taking casualties from weapons that should have been ineffective against their technology, not because human firepower was superior, but because human tactics made armor and shields irrelevant. Close-range collisions and point-blank explosions bypassed every defensive advantage the Valyrians possessed. Zethkar watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos as human. Ships darted between his vessels like insects attacking giants. His superior technology meant nothing when the enemy refused to fight at ranges where it mattered. The humans had turned space combat into a knife fight where desperation counted more than sophistication. The battle was just beginning, but already, Zethkar understood he was facing something unprecedented. These humans did not fight like any species he had encountered. They fought like creatures who valued victory more than survival, and that made them far more dangerous than their primitive technology suggested. The space around New Eden became a storm of metal and fire as human ships moved in ways that defied every military manual Zethkar had ever studied. Captain Lisa Barnes pushed her converted freighter Freedom's Edge directly into the heart of the Valyrian formation like a warrior charging into an army of giants. Her ship was not built for combat, but Barnes had spent months preparing for this moment. The freighter's cargo bay doors opened to reveal not trade goods, but carefully arranged explosive charges. Barnes detonated them in sequence as she passed, between two Valyrian battleships. The explosions would not damage alien armor, but they created debris clouds that fouled sensors and forced the massive ships to adjust course. Those course corrections pushed them closer together and created the collision Barnes had planned. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper monitored his modifications from the station's engine room while sweat dripped onto his control panels. The reactor output was climbing beyond every safety limit, but the massive structure continued accelerating toward the alien fleet. Cooper had accepted that his modifications would probably kill him, but they might also save the colony. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Walsh led his destroyer on an attack run that looked like madness to trained military eyes. Instead of maintaining safe distance, he drove his ship directly toward the largest Valyrian battleship while his crew fired everything they had. The alien vessel's point defense systems destroyed Walsh's ship, but not before he accomplished his real mission. The destroyer's reactor explosion created an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled the battleship's shields. Captain Tony Rodriguez brought his fighter wing through the gap and delivered precision strikes to the alien ship's weapon systems. Rodriguez had lost his family in the initial bombardment, but he flew with calculating precision despite tears. Streaming down his face, Zethkar watched his fleet take damage from tactics that violated every principle of warfare he understood. The humans were treating ship survival as secondary to mission completion. They accepted casualties that would break the morale of any civilized species while continuing to fight with undiminished effectiveness. The human station reached the edge of the Valyrian formation and began its final approach to Zethkar's flagship. Cooper's engines were burning out, but they had provided enough acceleration to turn the massive structure into a kinetic weapon. The station would not survive the impact, but neither would anything it hit. Colonel Danny Roberts coordinated ground forces on New Eden's surface as Valyrian landing craft descended toward the colony. His troops were outnumbered 10-1, but Roberts had prepared defensive positions that turned every street into a potential battleground. The humans did not retreat in orderly lines, but fought for every building while preparing surprises for their enemies. Sergeant Nicole Foster led her squad in a fighting withdrawal that somehow became an offensive operation. When Valyrian troops surrounded her position, Foster ordered a charge that broke through alien lines through sheer aggressive will. Her soldiers fought harder when wounded, rather than seeking medical attention, and that behavior confused enemies who expected rational responses to injury. Major Chris Taylor made decisions that horrified conventional military wisdom. He called artillery strikes on his own positions to deny strategic ground to the enemy. He accepted friendly fire casualties to maintain tactical advantage. He treated human lives as resources to be spent wisely, rather than preserved at all costs. Dr. Elena. Hayes established field hospitals in active combat zones instead of evacuating to safety. She treated wounded soldiers and immediately sent them back into battle. The humans seemed to view death not as a defeat to be avoided, but as an acceptable price for tactical advantage. Hayes worked under fire while Valyrian weapons exploded. Around her medical stations, Lieutenant Ben Cooper found himself shot down and surrounded by alien troops who demanded his surrender. Instead of complying, Cooper activated his fighter's self-destruct sequence and took an entire Valyrian squadron with him. His sacrifice was not desperate madness, but calculated strategy that prevented the aliens from achieving air superiority over the colony. Zethkar received reports from the ground assault that made no tactical sense. His troops were winning every individual engagement, but somehow losing overall momentum. Human forces retreated in ways that created ambush opportunities. They abandoned positions that became traps for pursuing aliens. They turned every defeat into preparation for counterattack. Thydur, Human Station continued its approach to the Valyrian flagship, while Cooper pushed his dying engines beyond theoretical limits. Zethkar realized the humans intended mutual destruction rather than accept defeat. This was not warfare, but fanaticism weaponized into military doctrine. Captain Morrison coordinated the impossible battle while damage reports flooded his command center. 60% of the human ships had been destroyed, but the survivors continued fighting with undiminished intensity. Morrison understood that conventional victory was impossible, but conventional victory was not the goal. Commander Sandra Phillips demonstrated human adaptability by abandoning standard tactics mid-battle. When her ship's weapons failed, she used the vessel as a battering ram. When her engines died, she detonated her remaining fuel to create debris that damaged pursuing aliens. Phillips treated every disadvantage as a potential weapon. The Valyrian formation began to collapse as human tactics forced individual alien ships to make independent decisions. The perfect coordination that had won the Empire countless victories became a liability when fighting enemies who refused to follow predictable patterns. Zethkar watched decades of military doctrine crumble under assault from creatures who fought like cornered animals. The space battle reached its climax as the human station entered final approach to the Valyrian flagship. Cooper's modifications had worked beyond his wildest calculations, but they had also doomed the massive structure. The station would impact in minutes and nothing could stop the collision. Zethkar understood with horrible clarity that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. These humans did not fight to win battles in any conventional sense. They fought to decide who deserved to survive, and they had decided the answer was not the Valyrian Empire. The collision between the human station and Zethkar's flagship shook space itself as millions of tons of metal met at velocities that turned matter into energy. Cooper's sacrifice had achieved its purpose as the massive impact crippled the alien command vessel and sent shockwaves through the Valyrian formation. The station died in the collision, but its death throes took half the enemy fleet with it. Zethkar survived the impact in his emergency command pod, but watched in shock as his perfect fleet dissolved into chaos. The humans had taught him a lesson. No military academy could provide. Sometimes winning meant being willing to lose everything. The creatures who had just destroyed his flagship understood that principle better than any species he had encountered. Colonel Danny Roberts emerged from the rubble of New Eden's command center and immediately began reorganizing his scattered forces. The Valyrian ground assault had captured most of the colony, but Roberts treated this as an opportunity rather than a defeat. His troops knew every building and every street while the aliens were fighting in unfamiliar territory. Sergeant Nicole Foster gathered the survivors of her squad and began what she called aggressive reconnaissance. She led attacks on alien supply lines while avoiding direct confrontation with superior forces. Foster had learned that human mobility could overcome alien firepower if applied with sufficient audacity. The remaining human ships regrouped under Captain Morrison's command as he transferred his flag to the destroyer Defiance. The vessel was damaged and understaffed, but Morrison continued coordinating resistance from its cramped bridge. He understood that conventional military victory was impossible, but conventional victory was not what the humans needed. Major Chris Taylor coordinated artillery support from positions the Valyrians had not yet located. His guns fired on alien concentrations while accepting that counter-battery fire would eventually find them. Taylor treated his artillery as expendable resources rather than permanent assets, and that mobility kept them effective far longer than static positions would have allowed. Dr. Elena Hayes moved her medical operations to underground tunnels that connected the colony's major buildings. She continued treating wounded soldiers while Valyrian troops searched the surface above. Hayes had transformed her medical station into a mobile hospital that could relocate faster than enemies could track it. The battle for New Eden became a lesson in asymmetric warfare as human defenders used their knowledge of local terrain to offset alien technological advantages. Roberts coordinated attacks that struck alien weak points while avoiding their strengths. His troops fought like guerrillas who understood that survival meant constant movement. Lieutenant Amy Carter worked from a backup command center buried deep beneath the colony's main spaceport. Her tactical computers had been destroyed, but she continued analyzing Valyrian patterns using paper charts and mental calculations. Carter realized the aliens were making predictable mistakes because they expected rational responses to superior force. Captain Lisa Barnes survived the destruction of her ship and found herself commanding a mixed group of naval personnel and civilian volunteers. She led them in raids against alien landing sites using captured equipment and improvised weapons. Barnes discovered that human adaptability was more valuable than alien technology when applied with sufficient creativity. The Valyrian forces on New Eden began experiencing something they had never encountered in previous conquests: the human. Resistance was growing stronger rather than weaker as the battle continued. Every alien victory created new opportunities for human counterattacks. Every human defeat became preparation for the next phase of resistance. Zethkar monitored the ground battle from his damaged flagship and tried to understand what he was witnessing. His troops controlled most of the colony, but they could not eliminate the human defenders. The humans fought from positions that did not exist on any map and struck targets that should have been impossible to reach. Commander Sandra Phillips led the surviving human ships in hit-and-run attacks against the scattered Valyrian fleet. She used the debris from destroyed vessels as cover, while launching precision strikes against enemy weak points. Phillips treated space combat like underwater fighting, where stealth mattered more than firepower. The battle expanded to Haven Station, as Valyrian reinforcements arrived to find human defenders who had learned from New Eden's experience. Captain Jake Morrison transmitted tactical data to all human colonies before the communication networks were destroyed. Each colony would face the aliens with knowledge purchased by blood and sacrifice. Lieutenant Ben Cooper had died in his fighter crash, but his sacrifice inspired other human pilots to attempt equally desperate tactics. The Colonial Defense Force transformed suicide missions into standard operating procedure. Human fighters attacked alien ships at point-blank range while accepting that survival was unlikely. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper's modifications spread to other human ships as surviving technicians replicated his work under combat conditions. The humans began pushing their primitive technology beyond safe limits while accepting catastrophic failure rates. Every human ship became a potential weapon, regardless of its original purpose. Dr. Elena Hayes established communication networks between isolated resistance groups using medical channels the aliens could not monitor. Her hospital became the nerve, center of human resistance as wounded soldiers carried information between scattered units. Hayes had weaponized medical care into an intelligence operation. The ground fighting on New Eden reached new levels of intensity as human defenders implemented tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They used civilian areas as military bases while evacuating non-combatants through hidden tunnels. They turned every public building into a potential fortress while keeping the population mobile. Zethkar realized his forces were winning individual battles while losing the overall campaign. The humans refused to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. They treated every setback as a learning experience and every victory as preparation for the next challenge. The Valyrian Empire had encountered something it could not comprehend. The space around New Eden became a graveyard of ships from both sides, but the human resistance continued growing stronger. Morrison coordinated attacks from his mobile command center, while alien hunting parties searched for his location. The humans had learned to fight without fixed positions or predictable patterns. Zethkar studied captured human communications in his damaged command center and discovered something that disturbed him more than their tactical ferocity. The humans were not acting from desperation or religious fanaticism, but following calculated doctrine that treated individual survival as less important than collective victory. Their military manuals actually contained procedures for acceptable loss rates that would break any civilized army. The intercepted messages between human commanders revealed planning that assumed catastrophic casualties while maintaining operational effectiveness. Captain Morrison coordinated with Haven Station and Prosperity, using codes that accepted the probability of communication breakdown. Lieutenant Amy Carter distributed tactical analysis that included calculations for fighting without central command. Commander Sandra Phillips demonstrated human adaptability by completely abandoning her ship when repairs became impossible. She transferred her crew to damaged alien vessels and continued fighting using enemy technology. Phillips had learned to operate Valyrian systems through combat experience and turned captured ships into weapons against their former owners. The ground battle on New Eden evolved into something that challenged every assumption Zethkar held about warfare. Colonel Danny Roberts coordinated resistance from positions that changed faster than alien intelligence could track them. His forces appeared and disappeared like ghosts while inflicting steady casualties on occupation troops. Dr. Elena Hayes revealed another disturbing human trait as she established medical stations in active combat zones. Instead of evacuating casualties, she treated wounded soldiers and immediately returned them to battle. The humans seemed to view medical care not as humanitarian necessity, but as force multiplication that kept fighters operational beyond normal endurance limits. Sergeant Nicole Foster demonstrated the most unsettling human characteristic when she continued fighting effectively while experiencing emotions that should have rendered her combat ineffective. Foster had lost her entire family in the initial bombardment, yet she led attacks with calculating precision while grief and rage fueled her tactical thinking rather than compromising it. The Human Defense Force had transformed from a conventional military organization into something that defied classification. Captain Tony Rodriguez commanded fighters that treated their own aircraft as expendable munitions. Major Chris Taylor coordinated artillery that fired from positions expecting immediate counter-battery destruction. Every human unit operated under the assumption that survival was temporary, but mission completion was permanent. Zethkar received reports from occupied territories that made no tactical sense. Human civilians were not cowering in shelters or collaborating with occupation forces. They were providing intelligence and logistical support to resistance fighters while maintaining the appearance of normal daily life. The entire human population had become part of their military structure. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper's modifications had spread throughout the human fleet as surviving technicians implemented his designs under combat conditions. Human ships now operated at power levels that guaranteed eventual catastrophic failure, but provided temporary performance that matched or exceeded alien capabilities. The humans had weaponized their own technological limitations. The battle for Haven Station revealed new dimensions of human tactical thinking as defenders implemented lessons learned from New Eden's fighting. Captain Lisa Barnes coordinated orbital defenses that used the space station's civilian areas as military installations while evacuating non-combatants through cargo airlocks. Every part of human infrastructure became potential military assets. Lieutenant Ben Cooper's sacrifice had inspired other human pilots to develop standard procedures for kamikaze attacks against superior alien forces. The Colonial Defense Force treated suicide missions not as desperate last resorts, but as acceptable tactical options when conventional approaches proved insufficient. Human fighters began approaching alien ships at ranges that guaranteed mutual destruction. Zethkar analyzed human tactical doctrine and found principles that violated everything he understood about military science. The humans calculated acceptable friendly fire percentages that would constitute war crimes in Valyrian society. They planned operations that assumed unit destruction while maintaining overall mission effectiveness. They treated individual death as an investment in collective survival. The resistance on New Eden had evolved beyond anything the Valyrian Empire had encountered in its conquest of 17 other species. Human defenders struck from tunnel networks that connected the entire colony. They used civilian infrastructure as military bases while keeping the population mobile through evacuation routes that existed in every building. Commander Sandra Phillips coordinated space operations from captured alien vessels, while her original crew operated enemy technology with increasing proficiency. The humans had learned to maintain and modify Valyrian equipment through combat experience. Phillips now commanded a mixed fleet of human and alien ships that fought using tactics both sides found incomprehensible. Dr. Elena Hayes expanded her medical operations into a communication network that connected isolated resistance groups across multiple star systems. Her hospital ships carried information between colonies while providing medical care that kept human forces operational beyond normal endurance limits. Hayes had transformed humanitarian medicine into military intelligence. The ground fighting on New Eden reached levels of intensity that challenged Valyrian understanding of civilized warfare. Human defenders used every civilian structure as potential military installations while maintaining evacuation procedures that kept non-combatants safe. They had weaponized their own cities while protecting their own people. Captain Morrison commanded the overall human resistance from a mobile headquarters that relocated constantly to avoid alien detection. His strategic planning assumed the loss of central command while maintaining operational effectiveness through distributed leadership. Morrison had created a military structure that became stronger when damaged, rather than weaker. Zethkar realized that human fury was not a weakness, that compromised their judgment but a force multiplier that enhanced their tactical capabilities. The humans fought hardest when they had the most to lose, and became more dangerous as their situation became more desperate. They had transformed emotional response into military advantage. The Valyrian Third Fleet found itself fighting an enemy that grew stronger through defeat and more determined through loss. Every human casualty seemed to increase the effectiveness of survivors. Every tactical victory for the aliens created strategic opportunities for human counterattack. Zethkar understood he was facing something unprecedented in galactic history. The space around the human colonies had become a combat laboratory where both sides learned new forms of warfare. But the humans learned faster and adapted more completely than their alien enemies. They treated every engagement as education rather than simply destruction. The Valyrian Third Fleet began its retreat from human space after suffering losses that should have been impossible against such primitive opponents. Zethkar transmitted withdrawal orders to his surviving ships while trying to understand how. A force one-tenth his size had achieved tactical superiority through methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The human victory had cost them dearly with casualty rates that would have shattered any other species. 60% of their ships destroyed, 2 colonies heavily damaged, and resources they could not afford to lose. But Captain Morrison understood they had achieved something more valuable than territorial defense. They had bought time for humanity, to prepare for the inevitable return of alien invaders. Commander Sandra Phillips coordinated the final attacks against retreating Valyrian vessels using captured alien technology operated by human crews. Her mixed fleet pursued the enemy ships while inflicting additional casualties on forces that no longer had the will to fight. Phillips had learned that human aggression could overcome technological disadvantage when applied without restraint. The ground forces on New Eden emerged from their tunnel networks to survey the devastation of their colony. Colonel Danny Roberts organized cleanup operations while maintaining defensive positions in case the aliens attempted another assault. His troops had transformed from conventional soldiers into something that resembled guerrilla fighters more than regular military units. Dr. Elena Hayes established permanent medical facilities in the underground networks that had sheltered human resistance during the occupation. Her hospitals would serve as command centers for future defensive operations while providing care for the thousands of wounded survivors. Hayes understood that healing and fighting had become the same mission. Lieutenant Amy Carter worked with surviving technicians to analyze captured Valyrian equipment and communication intercepts. Her intelligence gathering revealed that the human colonies had faced only advanced elements of a much larger alien empire. The real war was just beginning, but humanity now understood what they were fighting against. Zethkar composed his report to the Valyrian High Command while his damaged flagship limped toward Imperial space. He struggled to explain how a technologically inferior species had achieved strategic victory through tactics that bordered on madness. His military career spanning 2 decades provided no framework for understanding what he had witnessed. Saximo Human Defense Force reorganized under Morrison's command while incorporating lessons learned from their first encounter with alien technology. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper's modifications became standard equipment for all human vessels. Lieutenant Ben Cooper's sacrifice inspired new tactical doctrines that treated individual survival as secondary to mission completion. Captain Tony Rodriguez led salvage operations to recover useful technology from destroyed alien ships. The humans had learned to adapt enemy equipment for their own purposes while developing countermeasures against Valyrian weapon systems. Rodriguez understood that every piece of alien technology was both a tool and a lesson in how to fight superior forces. Resistance networks established during the occupation became permanent features of human colonial defense. Sergeant Nicole Foster trained civilian volunteers in guerrilla tactics while establishing supply caches that could sustain prolonged campaigns. The humans had learned that conventional military structures were insufficient against technologically superior enemies. Zethkar's final log entry contained words that would change galactic military doctrine forever. He described an enemy that became more dangerous when wounded and more determined when facing impossible odds. The humans had demonstrated something unprecedented in his experience. They were a species that fought hardest when they had the most to lose. The alien commander wrote that these creatures did not fight to win battles in any conventional sense, but to decide who deserved to survive them. The Valyrian Empire would need to reconsider its expansion into human space because they had encountered something that challenged every assumption about warfare and civilization. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of his new flagship and watched alien ships disappear into hyperspace. The human victory was incomplete and temporary, but it had sent a message across the galaxy. Earth's children would not accept subjugation without a fight that would cost both sides more than anyone could afford. The colonies began rebuilding while preparing for the next alien assault. Every human settlement became a fortress designed to resist occupation. Every civilian learned basic military skills while maintaining their normal occupations. The humans had transformed their entire society into a military organization without losing their essential humanity. Lieutenant Colonel Megan Hall surveyed the aftermath of the battle and understood what Morrison had achieved. The humans had not defeated the Valyrian Empire, but they had proven that some species would rather burn than kneel. They had demonstrated that technological superiority meant nothing against opponents who refused to accept logical defeat. The space around New Eden became a monument to human determination, as wreckage from both fleets drifted in eternal orbit. The debris field served as a reminder that warfare had rules until someone decided those rules were less important than survival itself. Zethkar transmitted his final message to Imperial headquarters with the recommendation that human space be classified as a military exclusion zone. The Empire should seek expansion in other directions because the cost of conquering humanity would exceed any possible benefit. Some species were too dangerous to fight even when victory seemed certain. The Galaxy received its first lesson in human warfare as news of the battle spread through alien communication networks. Species that had never heard of Earth began asking questions about the creatures who had turned certain defeat into tactical victory through methods that challenged every assumption about civilized behavior. Humanity had announced its presence in galactic affairs, not through diplomacy or trade, but through a demonstration that they were willing to pay any price to remain free. The universe would never underestimate human determination again, because the price of that mistake had been written in the wreckage of the Valyrian Third Fleet.